Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, jam-packed with information. Obviously, tomorrow, big day for Georgia when it comes to the possibility of 2 commits added to this 2026 class. We'll talk about that today. There was also a little bit of a now official change from what was also supposed to be going on tomorrow. We'll give you that as it relates to a major Georgia target off the top of the program today. And in addition to that, a couple of interesting things. A thing that made you mad a year ago should probably make you mad again here today. We'll tell you why that is as it relates to some of Georgia's stiffest competition within the SEC. And ESPN already doing its part to hype up the big Georgia-Alabama game and why it's such a scary thing for Georgia to consider here. We'll do that with you on the program. And if that's not enough, SEC Media Days also starts Monday as well, and we'll be there for the entirety of the week. So there is so much going on. We're excited about it all. Got a special guest today, Kaylee Mansell, going to be on the show in place of Jeff Sintel, who's enjoying a little bit of vacation. So it's a Friday. The rest of the world's asleep. The rest of the world's sort of stumbling through their summer. But we are locked and loaded and ready to go, and we're glad you're with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is a lot going on with UGA recruiting. You already know that. Tomorrow, big day for the Dogs, at least potentially, with 2 major targets set to announce their commitment. It is also perhaps a big day for Dog Nation as well, because we are, and how do you like this for a tease? We are going to attempt something tomorrow that has, to my knowledge, never been done before. Will it work? Maybe not, but we're going to try our best to make sure that it does, and we're going to have a special guest a little bit later on. Do you love Kaylee Mansell? Of course you do. Kaylee in place of Jeff Sintel, going to be with us in a few minutes. We're going to talk about why tomorrow sets up to be a very, very big day for the Georgia Bulldogs in recruiting, with the possibility of adding 2 commitments. We'll preview that for Ty Green out of Buford. This is a defensive back that, as a name, has kind of climbed the rankings a lot lately. In fact, even for those who kind of follow recruiting closely, maybe perhaps they don't really realize just how much Green as a prospect, rated as an athlete, a defensive back at Georgia, if he were to come, how much as a prospect Green's kind of on the ascent right now. It's also been nice to see Georgia kind of get a little bit of an inroad into the Buford program as of late. Green would obviously be another example of that. Tomorrow afternoon, he is set to make his commitment announcement. We're watching it closely. The same thing is absolutely true for Caden Prothrow. Prothrow, has remained a Georgia priority for a very long time. Georgia has taken 2 tight end commitments in this 2026 class, but certainly in pursuit of Mark Bowman as well. Bowman, we certainly, even though he's not coming to Georgia, we still believe he's one of the best players in this class, regardless of position. There have been other tight ends that Georgia has also been interested in, including 2 currently committed, but Prothrow himself has been a massive, massive target for Georgia the entire time, and commitment day, decision day for Caden Prothrow is also tomorrow. We've talked about that plenty this week. We'll do that more coming up in just a little bit. It's also worth noting, as just sort of a quick note here, that what was initially supposed to make tomorrow, July 12th, even bigger, well, obviously, this kind of changed. And I was on vacation last week. Some of y'all know this. And you always run the risk of stuff happens on vacation and you don't really know. In fact, there was an example of that, because it was like Monday or Tuesday of this week, I was talking about Derrek Cooper making his commitment decision tomorrow as well. But that's not the case. Cooper had changed that date while I was gone, deciding to postpone that a bit. Cooper, you know him from down there in Hollywood, Florida, South Florida, the major 5-star running back, a guy that's taken a visit to Georgia, a guy that's also being hotly pursued by other programs as well. Well, after it was originally supposed to be tomorrow as a commitment day for Derrek Cooper, That changed, moving off that July 12th. We now have new information on that. We think it's important to give that to you right now. So let me show you this on the screen. The latest on Derrek Cooper, giving you his full top 5. You got Ohio State, Florida State, Georgia, Miami, and Texas. And what you love about this is that Georgia, boom, is right there in the center of the graphic. Now, that is not predictive, typically speaking, because we've seen, Georgia not always be in the center of the graphic and ultimately winning the commitment. Sometimes being in the center of the graphic doesn't mean quite as much. But I do think, and maybe this is my own personal bias showing, I do feel like we see Georgia in the center of these graphics kind of a lot. I think that just sort of speaks to the power of the Power G, that it just sort of looks better in the middle than these other logos, perhaps a little busier, perhaps not quite as neat and symmetrical. That G's never looked better right there in the middle of this as it relates to Derrek Cooper. Now, I am not really in the prediction business when it comes to recruits. I love talking about recruiting. I don't know that my predictions are are all that valuable. To me, this sort of feels like a situation where it's probably Georgia, Miami, Texas, more so than Ohio State, Florida State. And obviously maybe some of this even kind of comes down to, just based on the visits and things like that, the kind of hometown pull from Miami compared to the really aggressive effort that Georgia's put towards Cooper. We'll sort of say the same thing about this as we've said about other recruits. Just because we saw Georgia win a few weeks ago with Jay Lamar, the outstanding running back out of Colquitt County, I don't think that changes things for Cooper necessarily. In fact, and I thought this was so commendable on the part of Lamar, because obviously when you're a running back, if you share carries, you are also sharing the limelight, and you're perhaps even sharing some of the NIL budget, the compensation budget. But nonetheless, on the heels of committing to Georgia in the show we put for you on the DawgNation video channels just a couple of weeks ago, when Jay Lamar committed to UGA, he made it very clear that he wanted Derrek Cooper to join him in that 2026 class. We don't know if that's going to happen. Obviously, as we said before, the geographic advantage here belongs to Miami. We know what Texas is perhaps willing to do when it comes to throwing compensation around. There's reason to believe, in other words, that others might have an edge that maybe we think that Georgia doesn't quite have, but we're also led to believe that when Cooper visited Georgia, that visit went very well, and Georgia's obviously making running back a priority in this 2026 class, already succeeding with Lamar, and Lamar saying, hey, we think that Derrek Cooper could perhaps be next. So it's July 20th now, that date for Derrek Cooper. Georgia, one of 5 finalists for him, and even in kind of the sort of velvet rope VIP section of those 5 finalists, we think Georgia's a part of that too. So we'll see how it goes down for Cooper coming up in a few days. Originally supposed to be on July 12th. Now it's July 20th. Georgia, a major factor in this for the 5-star running back. We'll be watching that closely. More recruiting talk later on in the program, but for now, let me shift gears to something completely different. We like all of the off-season preview stuff that's out there because it just gives us a chance to have a starting point for a college football conversation that we just enjoy having. Some of this comes from ESPN when they look at the various issues related to their preseason top 25 teams. We did one of these yesterday with, honestly, a lot of these shows sort of run together. I don't even necessarily remember what issue that was for us yesterday, but we talked about something related to that. Well, today, ESPN's got a new story out at ESPN.com looking at the potential, and they call it an archvillain, the potential archvillain for all of the preseason top 25 teams. And for Georgia, ESPN says their archvillain is Alabama. Now, before I read to you what ESPN said about the upcoming Georgia-Alabama game and the little extra dose of hype they're giving that, let me make a slightly different point to lead into that. I think calling Alabama an archvillain for Georgia is actually pretty interesting phrasing, and it kind of bumps into something that I have talked about before, which is Georgia and Alabama has obviously become a very important series of games in college football. They have played for national championships. They played multiple times for the SEC championship. They are essentially the two kind of gold standardish programs in college football. And obviously we would say that Georgia's biggest win in the Kirby Smart era probably came against Alabama. That was the breakthrough national championship. And the most painful losses have also come against Alabama. So therefore, the series that Georgia has played against Alabama is certainly notable, and the most interesting games in college football over the course of the last decade have probably also been between Georgia and Alabama. So some people then want to take that to, well, that means that Alabama is Georgia's biggest rival. And obviously, we don't necessarily believe that for reasons I'm going to get into more in a moment. That Georgia and Alabama just don't have a great degree of history against each other. It has become an incredibly important series, the highest of highs, the lowest of lows. It's a prestigious series because of how many championships get decided by the outcome of the games between Georgia and Alabama. But ultimately, I would stop short of calling it a rivalry, even though there's probably no opponent that generates emotion for Georgia fans, maybe more so than Alabama does right now. What ESPN calls an archvillain, you've perhaps heard me say this before, that Alabama is not Georgia's biggest rival because, by the way in which I define rivalry, I'm not even sure it is a rivalry. But Alabama is Georgia's, I've used the phrase, arch nemesis. Alabama is the nemesis to Georgia. It is the barrier that has stood in the way of Georgia being everything it wants to be. It is the most challenging and formidable foe that exists for Georgia. It's the game that just gets the juices flowing more so than anything else. Now, eventually, over the period of decades and many years to come, could we eventually come to view Georgia and Alabama as a rivalry? We perhaps could, the same way that one day we may think of Georgia and Texas as rivals. But as it stands right now, I've always preferred the word nemesis over rival. ESPN calls it an arch villain, and given the way in which that Alabama has kind of just sort of stood as an obstacle to Georgia, you certainly understand why they kind of view the Tide in the villain role for UGA. In fact, let me read to you a little bit here of what ESPN says about the upcoming Georgia-Alabama game. Chris Lowe is the writer here saying, the last coach Georgia fans ever wanted to see on the other sideline is now doing television. Nick Saban was 5-1 against Kirby Smart. But even with Saban in his first year of retirement last season, Alabama still beat Georgia in a wild 41-34 game in Tuscaloosa, the final weekend of September. Chris Lowe goes on to say, Georgia has lost 9 of the past 10 games in the series and has beaten Alabama in the regular season since 2007, Saban's first season in Tuscaloosa, when the Mark Richt coached Bulldogs won 26-23 in overtime. Lowe goes on to conclude by saying, Georgia has vaulted to elite status under Smart, but a second straight loss to DeBoer, especially with this year's game being played in Athens, wouldn't sit well with anybody in Athens. That is Chris Lowe writing for ESPN.com. Now, let me start with the part about this that I think is undeniably true, and then let me kind of work backwards on what I think is a little bit of a misunderstood narrative about Georgia and Alabama. We believe that Lowe is probably 100% right when he says if Georgia were to lose to Alabama in Athens here this season, a second straight loss for Georgia in the Kalen DeBoer era, let's just be honest here for a moment. That would be bad. It would. And I don't know what it would mean. I'm not sure what your takeaway from that would be. Obviously, Georgia shook off a loss to Alabama a year ago, still won the SEC, still made the college football playoff. So it's not necessarily calamitous in terms of your end-of-season expectations. We think that Georgia's going to lose to somebody eventually. Alabama could certainly be it. So in terms of its tangible impact on the 2025 college football season, it doesn't necessarily end Georgia's chances of even winning the national championship, and it may be important for us to remember that if that does occur, because clearly this is one of the best teams Georgia's going to play this season. However, emotionally, spiritually, symbolically, losing to Alabama, again, would just be bad. Like sometimes the conventional wisdom is just right. You can't always be contrarian about every single thing. And this may be one of those situations where just conventional wisdom may have it pegged. They may have it nailed. that if you're Kirby Smart and you are the true elite program in college football, you can't lose in back-to-back years to someone like Kalen DeBoer trying to come into the SEC and figure all this out. That would not be good. So if we agree with that part, let me kind of broaden this out and talk about a little bit more about why some of the other stuff is, I think, a little bit overstated. I said a couple of minutes ago that I don't really think of Georgia and Alabama as being rivals. In fact, I think one of the things that would seemingly be a prerequisite for a rivalry is the fact that you play frequent enough to sort of feel that way. And Kirby Smart is now going into year 10 at his time here in Georgia, and many of you know this. We've certainly harped on this. In the entirety of the Kirby Smart era, here in 2025, this will be the first time that Alabama, led by DeBoer, led by Saban, led by whoever, this will be the first time that Alabama has played a game between the hedges in Sanford Stadium. So if the other team never comes to your stadium, how much of a rivalry could it really be? And more importantly, and this is where I think we kind of get into the fact that there are so many media types who sort of love to kind of hold this over Georgia. The lack of success against Alabama, they like to use this as a cudgel. Well, it's not exactly a fair fight if Alabama is playing games in its stadium and Alabama is playing Georgia in neutral site venues sometimes, but never coming between the hedges, a place that Georgia has not lost since 2019. So what is the actual record for Kirby Smart against Alabama? What is the actual relationship to Kirby and his previous employer? Let's find out once we see a little bit more balance into where these games are played. Because while Bama's beaten Georgia in Tuscaloosa a couple of times, and it's beaten Georgia in neutral site venues a couple of times, there are also a lot of neutral site games where Georgia could have played Alabama. But as you know, SEC championship in 2017, SEC championship in 2019, SEC championship game in 2022, Alabama didn't qualify to be there. Those were opportunities that Georgia could have had to get a win against the Crimson Tide. But when the game was played, Georgia had earned its way there. Alabama, though, nowhere to be found. So that's also, I think, important context in all of this. And plus, we've never really bought into the notion that somehow Nick Saban was this impossible villain that Georgia had no chance of ever overcoming, when the comparison you're making is Saban in kind of the prime of his coaching career, coaching in those early days against Kirby Smart as a kind of a rookie head coach, meeting for the first time in Smart's second year, meeting again in year 3. This was a time in which Georgia was still a huge underdog to Alabama. It's actually pretty miraculous that Kirby Smart had even gotten Georgia to those games against Alabama, given what he'd inherited when he took over the program in his first year in 2016. In other words, it didn't take Georgia a long time to get to Alabama's equal and now overtake it as the premier program. In retrospect, it's actually amazing that it happened as fast as it did. That's at least one way of viewing all that stuff. But nonetheless, ESPN hypes up the Georgia-Alabama game. And in one respect, at least, they are not wrong. This one is going to be about as big as it gets. Georgia could still lose and still achieve everything we want it to. But man, oh man, that is not a conversation I want to have. That is not a story I want to try to tell. Everything as it relates to our happiness of the 2025 season is a lot easier to conjure up. It's a lot easier to imagine if Georgia can kind of just go out here and shut up this entire talk about Bama being an archvillain or a nemesis or whatever it is that other people want to call them. Everything about the college football conversation around Georgia gets a lot more pleasant if they can just beat the Tide when the Tide for the first time comes to Athens here this September. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Kroger, and we are happy you are with us. No matter how you get to us. Video, we're live, 10 a.m. I love sitting here doing this show, being live with all of you and having this conversation. Just fun to do, right? It's like a sort of a sleepy summer Friday, but no reason why we can't just sort of sink our teeth into, hopefully an engaging college football conversation. The fact that so many of you enjoy doing that, boy, that's a great privilege for me. I'm so thankful to be able to do that with you here today. And I would not be able to do it. Listen, I'd have the will to, I'd have the desire to. You might even want to listen to it. But if it was not for a great sponsor like Kroger, we just wouldn't have the bandwidth to provide what it is we're able to provide for you. So huge thanks to Kroger for all of that. And a special thanks to Kroger for the extra step they take to provide the best quality of service to you. And we would say that if you want the very best of what Kroger has to offer, the obvious next step for you is to become a Kroger Boost member, because there's all kinds of features and benefits coming your way once you make that decision. Do you like more time for the things you enjoy? Of course you do. Well, how about this way to kind of leverage Kroger for your convenience? Take advantage of free grocery delivery, take advantage of free grocery pickup. And I see, look, the Kroger Boost trucks are in my neighborhood all the time, and what I love about them, they're refrigerated. You know, you buy produce and things like that. You want it kind of coming to you in kind of a nice vehicle that's going to keep it crisp and keep it looking the way that it's supposed to. With these refrigerated trucks from Kroger, of course, they'll do that. You can also take advantage of free grocery pickup if you'd rather do that, which is always a great thing. And on the stuff you're already buying at your local Kroger, normally you get a fuel point for every dollar spent, but as a Kroger Boost member, you get twice the fuel points for every dollar you spend on the things you're already buying at your local Kroger. So find out more online today. Kroger.com/boost for more on that. That is Kroger.com/boost for a lot more on that today. All right, great to have Kroger as a part of the program. Great to have all of you with us as well. Fun, special guest for us. It is Kaylee Mansell here coming up in a moment. Jeff Sintel enjoying some vacation. Kaylee in with us today and a big part of everything going on with DawgNation tomorrow. In fact, Kaylee's going to tell us about that along with me here coming up in just a couple of minutes. So prior to that, let's get ready to go around the DawgHouse. It's presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. And I think it's a good time to just sort of kind of refresh sort of where we are for the upcoming season. You know, a lot of the various sports books, and you kind of know the way it goes now. I think gambling is now legal. Do I have this right? Is it 40 of the 50 states? It's legal now more places than it isn't. And obviously, you know, it used to be we talked about if we're going to reference something related to a point spread or a line or something like that, you know, just the sort of default phrase was Vegas says. Hey, Vegas says Georgia's a 7.5 point favorite this week. That's just kind of the way people talk. But now there is way more money, most of you that follow this know this, way more money sort of wagered outside of Nevada than there is inside of Nevada, that Las Vegas just really isn't the market leader when it comes to this stuff anymore. But I would say that some of the best odds makers still exist within the state because it is still a competitive environment because you've got so many places to sort of go within the state of Nevada. And they are books that oftentimes only operate in Nevada. So there's a little bit of a different flavor to the Vegas odds that at times come out, even though most people are betting or kind of betting through a FanDuel or a DraftKings or one of those things that's available in numerous states. So the point is, one of the Las Vegas sports books has now kind of updated their season win totals for the SEC, making those now available. It's pretty similar to what we've seen before, but it is new. So let's kind of give this to you as a little bit of a taste of kind of where things stand in the SEC for the upcoming season. And I wanted to make two small points about what we see here. So let me show you this on the screen. Brett McMurphy, who we've talked about already this week, shares this to us via Circa Sports. Admittedly, this is not the prettiest graphic in the world. I have to take the blame for that. I made it, but I think it gets the job done. So this is what McMurphy gives us here on these odds for the upcoming season. So you've got, as everybody else sort of said too, 3 teams at the top with a projected win total of 9.5. These are, of course, regular season games only. Alabama, Georgia, Texas, all 3 coming in at 9.5. Then below that, you've got a trio of teams at 8.5. That's LSU, Ole Miss, Tennessee. Then below that, 2 teams at 8. That's Auburn and Texas A&M. Below that, 2 teams at 7.5. That's Florida and South Carolina. Below that, 2 teams at 7, Missouri and Oklahoma. Missouri, by the way, a little lower than we've seen in other places. We've seen them at 7.5 before. Y'all know I kind of like Missouri as a little bit of a sneaky over team here this year. An Oklahoma team that's gotten a lot of love from a lot of the sort of off-season, you know, kind of hot-take industrial complex. Just a win total, though, of 7. And then below that, you've got Vanderbilt 5.5, Arkansas 5, Kentucky 4.5, and Mississippi State at 3.5. Those are the win total projections, courtesy of Circa Sports, one of the most well-known sports books in Nevada. Now, let me give you 2 points about this here really quick. Actually, let me give you 3. Number one is this. We just spent a bunch of time talking about Alabama. I do think it's important to note, and I think this win total projection gives you a reminder of this. Alabama on paper looks like a very good team. We don't know who their quarterback is yet. And in fact, I think it's pretty interesting that in a week next week in which of the 16 teams in the SEC, 11 are bringing quarterbacks to media days. Alabama is one of the teams that isn't, even though we've been told by people close to the program in Tuscaloosa that Ty Simpson has had a very good offseason. Simpson has been with the Alabama program now for a period of years. He is the sort of experienced stately veteran who we've been led to believe is ready to take the starting reins, but he is not getting that nod by Kalen DeBoer for next week. That's at least interesting. But even with quarterback being an uncertainty, if you care about like top 100 player lists and stuff like that, Bama's going to be as represented on that kind of thing as anybody is. Ryan Williams, LT Overton, but that's not the sum total of the elite talent for the Alabama program. And so we just spent a couple of minutes saying, boy, this is a game that Georgia needs to win, and, archvillain this and nemesis that. The truth is, not to sugarcoat it, this win total, I think, tells you what you should know. Very, very tough game for Georgia, as tough as Texas expects to be. So there's that. But let me also talk about Georgia and Texas here for a moment. As you know, you're aware of this, media seemingly not, that Georgia beat Texas twice last season. And Texas is one of those teams, once again, also much like Alabama for me, not really a Georgia rival as of yet. But boy, is there anybody more annoying than Texas is? You'd maybe say no to that particular question. They certainly have a penchant for getting on our nerves, and almost every right-feeling college football fan, right-thinking college football fan would think the same way. And one of the things that bothered us about Texas a year ago, I think is fresh to bother us here again. In fact, if you don't mind, can we put that graphic back on the screen for a second? Because I want to kind of use this to make a point about while both Georgia and Texas are expected to be similar teams, projected win total of 9.5. Texas may be preseason number 1 when the official polls come out. Georgia's going to be within the top 5, we think. But how about this as a just staggering difference between Georgia and Texas in terms of the schedule that they're playing? If you look at the 6 teams with the highest win total other than Georgia, because Georgia can't play itself, if you look at the 6 teams with the highest projected win total, do you know that Georgia's playing 5 of those teams? Georgia plays Alabama, Georgia plays Texas, Georgia plays Ole Miss, Georgia plays Tennessee, Georgia also plays Auburn. Of the teams that have the highest projected win total, Georgia plays 5 of those 6. The only team with a win total of 8.5 or better that Georgia doesn't play in this particular season is LSU. Conversely, though, of the teams with the lowest projected win total, the 6 teams with the lowest projected win total, Texas plays 5 of those. So Georgia plays 5 of the 6 teams with the highest projected win total. Texas plays 5 of the 6 teams with the lowest projected win total. I'm talking about Mississippi State, Kentucky, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma. Texas plays all of them. So I don't think anything tells the tale of the imbalance of schedule that exists between Georgia and Texas more so than that. We knew that was true a year ago, and the SEC is essentially chosen, because of the lack of agreement over a permanent scheduling model, to sort of re-rack the same schedule again here this year. And we don't think on paper the Georgia schedule this year is any easier than it was a year ago. In fact, when you look at SEC teams that could improve, the Georgia schedule is perhaps even tougher. But the Texas schedule, at least within the conference, is just as easy this season as it was last season. Now, if a Texas fan's listening, watching right now, and some of them have a tendency to sort of show up and try to troll us a little bit, if they are watching, they will remind us they're playing Ohio State week 1, which is certainly true. But in terms of what the SEC had control over, who you're playing within the league, it is pretty obvious they were given quite a housewarming gift moving into this league by the schedule that they've been allowed to play for the last couple of years. And good for Kirby Smart, who called that out, or at least called out the Georgia part of this at the SEC Championship a year ago. You may remember that, with Greg Sankey standing right next to him. Now, let me give you also kind of one more small point on this. Then we're going to bring on Kaylee Mansell as a special guest here today. Here is something else that I think is really, really interesting. This has got very little to do with Georgia, but it's just something to pay attention to. And even if you don't care about like betting on games, because not everybody does, obviously if you do bet, you should bet responsibly. But even if you don't care about betting on games or betting on win totals and stuff like that, let me tell you something I think is going to be fascinating with this upcoming season. If you don't mind, for our team that are putting the show on, let's put the graphic back on one more time here, because here's what I want you to see. Yeah, we'll put that up on the screen. So when you look at the projected win totals, I believe this is probably the best way, the most useful tool for actually ranking the hierarchy within the SEC better than anything else. I believe that's probably the case. But I also think it's really fascinating to contrast this metrics-based evaluation with the more like sort of vibe check evaluation that comes from a preseason poll. And this year, you're going to see wildly different betting projections for some teams compared to the sort of human poll interpretation of those teams. Let me give you a couple of examples of this. Let's look at, for a second, at the three teams with a win total projection of 8.5. LSU, Ole Miss, Tennessee. Those are the three teams that have an 8.5 win total projection. Three teams that, based on that, you would assume are extraordinarily similar. But let me tell you what I think is fascinating about that, is that when the coaches poll and the AP poll come out in August, I think it's quite likely that LSU is going to be a preseason top 10 team. I believe they will. Y'all, it is very realistic. Maybe it won't happen, but it is very realistic that both Ole Miss and Tennessee could be unranked. Now, they'll probably slip in maybe bottom part of the top 25, which is in itself a pretty big chasm, but there's at least some chance. I know that some voters will leave Ole Miss and Tennessee off their top 25 ballot. There's a chance they're not preseason top 25 teams, and yet they have the exact same win total as a team in LSU that's almost certainly going to be in the top 10. That's a really interesting divide in terms of opinion. You see sort of a similar situation kind of in the middle to the bottom of all of this, where there are some sort of the hot take folks right now trying to sell you on Florida as a major turnaround team, yet their win total's just 7.5, a fairly meager total, a lot of that due to the schedule they play. South Carolina a year ago almost made the college football playoff. This year, though, their win total kind of reflects what they have been for the previous years prior to that. They're still at just 7.5. And finally, one to sort of think about here, an Oklahoma team where they have been, and we've joked about this, kind of the off-season national champions because of the work they've done in the transfer portal, but they have a win total that still sort of feels like they're being coached by a guy who's very much in the hot seat, which is what Brent Venables is. So the point is, if you care about any of this at all, that's what you should notice. That for this upcoming season, going into the year, we have a situation where the gambling odds and the preseason polls for a handful of SEC teams are going to be quite different, which means high drama once the 2025 season starts to take shape. And that is around the DawgHouse, and it's presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, we love drama when it comes to the college football season, but you don't want drama in your real life. If you can avoid it, obviously you want to. And sometimes, and you see stories about this in the news all the time, you go to the park, you just want to enjoy some sunshine, you want to walk your dog, and obviously as a courteous and caring owner, you're taking proper care of your pet. If only everybody else was the same way. Obviously, they're not. So somebody else's dog gets loose, it bites you, it knocks down your elderly grandmother. She's got a broken arm, you've gotten bitten, something along those lines. This is the sort of thing that does happen. And if you've been injured in this way, we would say that you deserve your chance to fight for compensation, just like anybody else in any other personal injury situation. That there's a responsibility that comes with owning a dog. There's a responsibility that comes with taking that dog out in public. And not everybody acts as responsibly as they should. And if you've been harmed or someone you love has been harmed in one of those situations, well, of course, we think you deserve your chance at pain and suffering, to have your medical bills taken care of, whatever happened because of someone else's negligence, or at least your perceived negligence on the part of that person. We think you deserve your chance to fight for compensation, and we believe our friends at Zagoria Law can help you for that in dog bite or injury situations caused by dogs. They literally wrote the book on how to win these kinds of cases. They're the only law firm in Georgia that specializes in this sort of thing. So we want you to give them a call. 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's 833-GA-DOG-BITE, dog spelled conventionally, D-O-G. You can also find them online, ZagoriaLaw.com. For those of you listening, that's ZAGORIA, ZagoriaLaw.com for more on that today. All right, before we're done, big week next week around the SEC. SEC Media Days gets ready to kick off. Dogs will have their day on Tuesday. We will talk about everything that's going to take place in Atlanta next week. We'll get that for you before we are done today. Also, there is a very, very controversial situation playing out in college athletics right now that sort of feels like it's deep in the weeds and to an extent that it is. But boy, big reaction coming from this a lot of different places. We'll give you a taste of that here before we're done today too. But for now, tomorrow, Dog Nation attempts something that it has never done before. What is it? How does it relate to UGA recruiting? Let's talk about that with our good friend Kaylee Mansell, producing today, doing double duty as the guest, pinch hitting for Jeff Sintel. All of that as a part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to our good friend Kaylee Mansell. Normally it's Jeff Sintel on a Friday. Jeff enjoying a wonderful vacation right now with his family, which is a great thing. Kaylee kind enough as a producer to also function as a guest today. Now, if I was a gentleman, I would have told Kaylee about this 4 days ago so she could have been preparing and getting ready for it. But because I am kind of a haphazard mess, I told Kaylee earlier this morning, after she'd already left the house, hey, how'd you like to be on the show? We'll have a good time. We'll talk. But luckily for Kaylee, she woke up looking this way. So she's already camera ready and ready to go. And, of course, we know information always top notch. The point is, Kaylee, even on short notice, so thankful to have you on the program. And frankly, it's good to be able to talk to you. I have really not spoken to you very much since I got back to from my vacation. So whether it's on air, off air, whatever else, I'm glad to get the chance to speak to you here today.
Well, I mean, at this point, I've worked with you long enough to know you pretty well and know your tendencies. And I was actually talking with Cody on Tuesday about being in here today, and I said, there's no Jeff Sintel, so I have a feeling who it could be. So I woke up this morning just kind of waiting on the call from you, but anytime I get to do DawgNation Daily, it's always a pleasure and a privilege. So I'm just excited that you trust me enough to take on such a big role on Friday.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's the anchor spot for the week, so we're glad to have you filling it. And then tomorrow, and this is serious, we're going to try to do something that we have never done before. I would say, if you don't mind me tooting our own horn for a moment, we've gotten pretty good at the commitment specials. People seem to enjoy them. I certainly love the chance to anchor them. Always a lot of fun. One of the biggest moments for these young men in their lives and the family of those players, when that dream of playing college football kind of culminates. We show it on video. It's always a great reaction, especially when that player goes to Georgia. Audience loves it. And so we've had a really good time doing that all summer long. It's been really an unprecedented run of these commitment announcements as of late. And yet tomorrow, you got double duty. You got Tyree Green in Buford. You've got the great Caden Prothro over at the Alabama state line, almost, I guess, from Bowden. You've got two big announcements taking place tomorrow. And somehow, some way, Kaylee, if I have this right, we're going to attempt to cover both of these here tomorrow. That means I get to sit in the studio and be like Scott Hansen in the red zone. And hopefully our good friend Cody Chaffins is listening right now. My goal is, if we're going to go Green and Prothro, can we also find an excuse to go like quad box at some point in time? You know, like one of those things like Scott Hansen gets to do where you got 4 games going at once. Can we find 2 other things to also put on the screen so perhaps we can go quad box tomorrow with our Scott Hansen NFL red zone style coverage of 2 different commits? This is certainly going to be fun, is it not?
Well, when the idea got brought up, I initially was the one that said, I just don't even know if it's operationally possible to make something like this happen. But of course, all the amazing people behind the scenes were like, you know what, if there's a will, there's a way. And it kind of just worked out because Ty Boogie Green, the 4-star athlete out of Buford, he's going to go at 4 o'clock. And now it looks like Caden Prothro is going to go closer to 4:30. So our good friend Jack Leo is going to be on the scene in Buford. I will be in Bowden with Caden Prothro. I mean, just the fact that we're able to make something like this happen and showcase 2 really big commitments, because I mean, they're both important to the
Sure they are.
2026 class in one way or another. And both of the crystal ball picks are in for Georgia. So I'm glad that we didn't have to just choose one, because both of these guys can potentially bring something very special to what's already been an absolutely wild 2026 cycle.
That's exactly right. And you say, I mean, it's kind of funny to kind of pull back the curtain here for a moment.
Okay.
So I think originally we were kind of looking to Saturday. I mean, it is a Saturday, and while I love covering Georgia football, it's one of those things of, okay, well, maybe we can kind of just sort of show up, take care of business, and then sort of get back to our weekend. In other words, how can we do this sort of as quickly and painlessly as possible? And then somewhere along the way, it kind of turned into, how can we make this the most complicated broadcast we've ever done in the history of, like somewhere in the midst of the discussion, this went from, how do we make this relatively easy on ourselves for a Saturday to, is there a chance we could do something that we've never done before? And you said, I'm not even sure this is going to work. Kaylee, I'm still not exactly sure it's going to work, but I am glad we're going to give it a try.
Yeah, I mean, especially too because the initial idea was, okay, you got a 5-star tight end in Caden Prothro. You got to go to that. And then when Ty Boogie made that announcement, especially with him being from Buford and knowing the long-time history of Georgia and Buford and the way that things have kind of changed now with KJ Bolden making that initial step, I mean, we feel really confident about where these guys are headed. And also when you look at who Georgia's up against, especially for Caden Prothro, I mean, between Georgia, Florida, and Texas, and even Texas sites are putting out that they're going to lose Prothro to an SEC powerhouse. So anytime that Georgia gets a commit over Florida, I mean, that's a win in Brandon Adams' book.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, with Ty Green, it's between Georgia, Miami, and Auburn. And Georgia and Miami have gone head-to-head on the recruiting trail a lot this year. Can't say that Auburn's in that conversation at all anymore.
Well, Hugh Freeze is too busy playing golf for that to be the case.
Yeah. He's his priorities are not in line, and it's starting to show. But at the end of the day, this is two guys whose dreams are going to come true one way or another, and I'm just very thankful that we have the resources and the people to be able to make something like this happen.
I think it's really fun. And, a couple things I want to mention to you about this, and you kind of touched on it. I'm of the belief, and high school football as well as anybody, as many games that you've covered the last few years, I'm of the belief that the Buford curse is no longer a thing for Georgia. Now, that doesn't mean that Georgia's going to – I mean, look, I'm on guard for anything happening at all times. Anything can happen with Ty Green on Saturday. Anything can happen with any future Buford recruit in future years. I'm not making any kind of emphatic predictions about anything necessarily. But what used to be in the belief of some Georgia fans that somehow there was this extra barrier that prevented Georgia from getting the Buford players – I think you mentioned KJ Bolden by name. He was obviously, I think, the most substantial example of that just sort of being over. In fact, we've seen fruit on the other side of that for Georgia at Buford. Could continue again on Saturday with Ty Green. If there ever was a quote-unquote Buford curse for Georgia, I am no longer of the belief that that exists.
Yeah, and I think that we saw that earlier in the cycle, too, when Georgia went and got interior offensive lineman Graham Houston from Buford.
Yep.
So if they are able to get Ty Green, that's going to be 2 in the class. But, I mean, I think this is a really strong foundation between 2 powerhouse programs, with Georgia being at the college football level. And then everybody knows what Buford is. I mean, you go on social media, and this morning I literally saw some big media outlet put a graphic up of all the 4 stars and 3 stars that Buford was going to have on their roster. And it's like, these guys play at the highest level of competition, not just in the state of Georgia, but go outside of the state to play even better competition. And it's like, you look at Ty Green, right? He's a safety, and you say, well, Georgia has 3 safeties in the class already. Like, do you absolutely have to have him? But it's like, with the natural talent that he has versus the level of competition that he plays and the physicality that he goes up against each week, like, they're going to be able to make room in that group for a guy that played at Buford High School. And I think that's why Ty Green has continued to remain a priority, even though Georgia's safety room in 2026 is already stacked.
No, I think that's really interesting. And in the case of Caden Prothro, look, we know how hard Georgia went after Mark Bowman, and they should have. Bowman's an amazing player. We also know that Georgia has 2 tight end commits already for this class of 2026. But I have been steadfast in my belief, Kaylee, that pro throw has been the highest of priorities for Georgia throughout the entire time. And if they could have taken 4 tight ends, maybe they would. We're obviously in a time now where you can take a lot more than the sort of limits would have, kind of held you to in the past. Maybe Georgia would have taken 4 tight ends if they could have. But no matter how many tight ends they were ever going to take, pro throw was always going to be one of the top names they were going after. And obviously Georgia's got a lot to sell here. And look, you can have these other programs, and we've heard all kinds of rumors, and some of it's true, some of it's not, about the sort of dollars perhaps being, kind of offered him, his way. But this is just sort of the kind of player that Georgia seems to know how to succeed with. And I know we've gotten really used to hearing, oh man, this is the elite, very athletic tight end, essentially athletic enough to be a wide receiver. And we almost kind of gloss over that because we've heard that so much. I just think that people need to understand what a true plus athlete pro throw is. And as athletically gifted as almost anybody we've talked about in terms of, coming into Georgia at this style of position, I think he's a really interesting prospect. And if he does commit to Georgia tomorrow, it'll be as, one of the bigger gets for Georgia in this 2026 class if it does go down that way.
Especially, too, with him being a 5-star and there only being one consensus in the entire class, with that being Jared Curtis. I mean, it's going to make headlines if Georgia gets Caden Prothro. I agree. Even if they would have gotten Mark Bowman and maybe another tight end in the class, it wouldn't have mattered because Caden Prothro's versatility and skill set sets himself apart from everyone else. You look at the measurements itself, 6'6", 210, and his high school stats resemble that of a wide receiver as opposed to a tight end. 21.5 yards per catch, and he converted 22 of 56 catches to touchdowns last year in high school football. I think that because he can also play in that wide receiver position, he was always going to be a priority regardless. And now that Georgia gets another tight end commit and Braden Fogel last week, that gives them the opportunity to use Caden Prothro how they want.
Yeah, to me, he kind of reminds me a little bit of what I think that Georgia has a lot of on this year's team, and I don't think you can have too much of this. I don't know how good of a contested catch team Georgia was a year ago. Mm-hmm. The 50-50 ball, you got to go try to high point it, or you just got to try to win a battle and be more physical than the defensive back that's covering you. I don't know how great Georgia was at that a year ago. Boy, Colby Young coming back, Noah Thomas coming in, Lawson Lucky, among others, but I'll just mention those 3 for right now. They feel like contested catch guys. And Caden Prothro, to me, sort of feels like at the college level because he's so tall, because he has, the athleticism that he has. He'll obviously even get stronger in a college strength and, conditioning program, getting college, style nutrition. He also, I think, has a chance to be, whether it's as a wide receiver or as a tight end, he has a chance to be a real contested catch guy. And I just think that's one of the most valuable commodities you can bring to the table.
Yeah, I think if you take 2 current players on their team, he's got the size and the freaky athleticism of what would resemble Colby Young, but he's got the versatility of someone like, say, Lawson Lucky, who we kind of saw him do it all last year. Yep. And with the way that things played out with the pass catchers last season, I think that Georgia knows that that can't continue to be an issue here. And they quickly addressed that this year by bringing in some transfer guys and bringing in guys at the high school ranks. And I think that's something that they're going to continue to prioritize because, quite frankly, it was just embarrassing to watch last year. So I think they're being really, really specific about the pass catchers that they want to get. And Caden Prothro, with the versatility of him being a guy that can play tight end but also can be in that X-receiver role, this is somebody that you absolutely cannot miss out on.
All right, let me finish with this, completely different from recruiting. We talked earlier about the Georgia-Alabama game, the hype that it's already getting from ESPN. Some of what's being said about Georgia and Alabama, to be frank, is not untrue. Georgia really does need to get this win, but it's also a real opportunity and, frankly, far too long in the coming here, that Georgia gets a chance to host Alabama in Athens. Crimson Tide coming between the hedges. Kaylee, how excited are you already for this atmosphere? It's the first big game at home for Georgia in the 2025 season. It's one of the biggest home games Georgia has ever had. I get almost like chill bumps even kind of thinking about it, and I still feel that way, and I'm glad that I do. College football still brings that out of me. But how excited are you about what Georgia-Alabama in September can be and hopefully will be for the Dogs?
Somebody needs to cue the Phil Collins "I Can Feel It in the Air Tonight," because
we'll get a
that's what-
YouTube strike if we do, but spiritually,
we're
we'll be
not
thinking
going
about
to do that. But you know what I mean. Especially with high school football season coming up, that song is played every single time
Every
we go
week.
somewhere. You know it too.
every week.
It's honestly still hard for me to process and fathom that game is even going to occur, especially since it's happening early in the season. And I think the mistake that I've made in my 2 years at DawgNation is, I don't want to say getting my hopes up, but just putting the Disney dog goggles on when it comes to Alabama. Now, there is a sense of security and knowing that it's at home, but it's also still against Alabama, so you can't count out any possibilities. But man, it's just, now that I'm getting a little bit older, there are certain moments and things that happen where I realize at that point in time, like, this is something that I'm always going to remember for the rest of my life. And when I look at the Georgia-Alabama game that's going to take place in Sanford Stadium, that's one of those days that I know that regardless of what happens and the outcome, like, I am always going to remember what it felt like to be there. And so that's something I'm looking forward to.
Well, I'll also say this to kind of wrap it up. It also kind of reminds me of the difference between you and me, probably because, we're together a lot. We work together, friends, things like that. So I sort of think of us sometimes as the same. But I'd be scared to know how old you were the last time Bama came here in 2015. By contrast, I was hosting DawgNation Daily. Okay, so in 2015, the last time Georgia hosted Alabama, I was actually doing the same job that I'm doing now. My guess is, I'm not even sure I want you to tell me.
I'm not going to say the specifics, but let's just say that at that point in time, I couldn't drive. I didn't have a license.
So if you want to get a full idea of just how different things are, I was doing DawgNation Daily, and you were basically playing with Barbie dolls. But that is a very, very different time in our life. That is very, very funny stuff. Kaylee, I'm excited about tomorrow. I honestly, in all seriousness, it's a thrill to have you on the show today. You're doing a great job, and you always do. And we'll look forward to big coverage tomorrow for a couple of big announcements. Caden Prothro, Ty Boogie Green. Georgia has a chance to add 2 more commits this class of 2026. Thank you so much for talking to us about that today.
Yeah, I'm excited not just for tomorrow, but also my Met Gala, aka SEC Media Days, is next week, which is that's my time to shine. So there's a lot to look forward to this week, and I'm excited to do it all with you.
It is going to be a lot of fun. Thanks a lot, Kaylee.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, there's that one not necessarily a meme, but it's like a video gets shared a lot of what was the Great Depression like? Like the fact that I was in this chair doing this show back in 2015, that's probably my version of Kaylee asking me what the Great Depression was like. And honestly, that day, if the Great Depression was worse than that, well, I'm not quite so sure, because that was not a very good day. But nonetheless, pretty interesting difference there on all of that. By the way, speaking of SEC Media Days, we're going to do more of a preview of that here coming up in just a minute before we get ready to close things out. But prior to that, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let's get you excited for all of the big stuff going on with Royal Caribbean here in 2025. In fact, I told you about this the other day. If you think about the Royal Beach Club, that's Nassau in the Bahamas. If you think about that, it's brand new. It's opening up by the end of this year. Did you know right now, if you want to be a part of Royal Beach Club, Nassau in the Bahamas, and all the ships that will be sailing there, you can already kind of book your experience there for that. It's going to be a lot like Perfect Day Cocoa Cake, except it's going to be in Nassau. Ships such as Utopia of the Seas and the brand new Star of the Seas, Icon of the Seas, they're going to be sailing there. And here's the thing, for a lot of people who've maybe been on cruises before, Nassau is a port you probably visited. In fact, almost anybody who's ever taken a cruise has probably visited Nassau. It is, I think, by all measures, the most visited cruise port. But it's also one of those things, you've kind of been there, you sort of feel like you've been there, done that. It's going to be a game changer, though, when Royal Caribbean introduces this brand new private destination exclusively for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. You've never experienced Nassau like this. It's going to be like a Perfect Day Cocoa Cay. So many of the same things you love about Perfect Day Cocoa Cay. You're going to get that experience there at the Royal Beach Club in Nassau. It's going to be kind of right there at the port, short little water taxi over, and you're going to be there enjoying this exclusive beach experience at the Royal Beach Club Nassau in the Bahamas. I love telling you about it, but Jessica Slater can tell you even more. Terrific travel advisor, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll get you ready for all of that. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, just for a little bit here. Let me talk to you about this. So, we talked the other day on the show about what we kind of described as it relates to the House settlement and the aftermath of that and the new scrutiny for NIL deals. We talked about this as essentially being two sides of a very big bet. And you're going to see different factions, different conferences, different programs within those conferences kind of lining up on one side of this bet or the other. And it's pretty obvious the side that Georgia, and frankly the rest of the SEC for the most part, was on, which is in the new landscape, NIL, the thing that's been with us since 2021, was going to be treated differently, and that the revenue sharing and the scrutiny of NIL deals and the requirement that they be quote-unquote fair market value, reflecting true NIL and not kind of pay for play as they've kind of been in recent years, this was going to be a real thing. Not everybody believed that. We have seen really, really aggressive actions in the NIL. Even in the wake of the House settlement, some programs have been kind of moving forward and doing the same stuff that they've always done. Well, guess what? The NIL evaluations have started by Deloitte. Now, there are several aspects of this that are controversial. On the one hand, some of this stuff is kind of taking a while to kind of make its way through the approval process. People are unhappy about that. But the thing that a lot of people have noticed the most, and some are unhappy about, is what we sort of think of as kind of an old school NIL deal, the sort of thing that's been going on since 2021. Those deals are being denied by Deloitte. And a large number of the NIL sort of compensation agreements that are being kind of put into the system for Deloitte to oversee, Deloitte's not rubber stamping these. Deloitte is looking at them closely, evaluating them the way that this consulting firm said that it would, and we are seeing some denials. Deloitte told the ACC their spring meetings going back a couple of months ago that had it been in place doing what it's doing now last year, about 75% of all NIL deals would have been denied, according to the charge that Deloitte has been given here. It's not quite 75% of deals we're seeing denied right now, but as Ross Dellinger is reporting, that and I'll give you this straight from his X account from yesterday, and Dellinger is kind of always the top guy on this stuff. He says it's been obvious for months that, listen to this now, traditional collective deals won't be cleared. He says that collectives must evolve into marketing agencies to strike deals with brands and businesses. So the old school pay for play, where you're just using NIL as a form of third-party compensation, but not actually for name, image, likeness, for instead just the value you bring to the football field. As of now, the NCAA and this Deloitte clearinghouse is operating as if they have the power to say no to some of this stuff. It's creating a huge controversy. This is a big deal. It feels like it's in the weeds. It feels like your eyes kind of want to gloss over, and in some respects, you probably do. But this is something, and this is the sort of thing that's shaping the future of college athletics if it really does stand. It will be challenged. We'll see how much this can withstand those challenges. But this NIL clearinghouse right now is operating as if it has some teeth. We'll see if that continues. Let me also give you a quick update on this. And we are not going to do a lot of this because it just sort of bumps into what we don't talk about. But we got more information about the proposed legislation in the U.S. House of Representatives for what's being known as the SCORE Act, related to antitrust stuff and the NIL stuff, and what I would sort of think in kind of common language as the thing that can make college athletics sort of continue to feel like college athletics. We told you yesterday that the proposed legislation on this now, as once again reported by Ross Dellinger, is getting further down the path than any legislation has forever, long time, whatever you want to say. We got more information about this yesterday. That now the actual bill itself that's kind of moving, or at least attempting to move through the House of Representatives, has bipartisan support. And we're not going to do the red and blue stuff, the Republican Democrat stuff, but you just know this, whichever side of the aisle you happen to be on, that if you do have legitimate support on both sides, you just have a lot better chance of being taken seriously. This now does have bipartisan support. Now, I'm not here to tell you this bill is going to get passed, that it's going to be the game changer, but our prediction that there was some movement in a positive direction as it relates to stuff like this is coming true. This is more serious than it's ever been before. And look, if you want to say, well, it's never going to happen and blah, 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 like, very good chance you turn out to be right. But there are a lot of people, I would say the majority of the public, that wants to figure out a way to kind of solve some of the issues related to compensation and things like that without completely reinventing what college athletics has been. In fact, totally contrary to if you saw the Oklahoma State coach, Mike Gundy, we just had Big 12 media days. Gundy becoming a pretty prominent voice saying you're going to have to make all these guys employees. That's the only way to do this. I don't believe that is the case. I'm not anti-compensation, but when you make the players themselves employees, all of a sudden now you're making college football into a completely different thing than it's been before. And I think with the movement in Congress, with the public support that it seems to have, there is a way to do right by players, take care of them from a compensation standpoint, without making them into the so-called employees and the collective bargaining that turns this into a minor league professional sport. When you look at the rest of the landscape of sports in America, you don't see any minor league sport anywhere, a professional sport lower than the Major League Baseball, NBA, NFL level. You don't see any minor league sport that has any sort of valid business reason for existing. None of them are successful in any way whatsoever. In other words, you don't want college football to look more like that. If you care about the future of college athletics, you want it to look more like what it has been in the past. And I think this proposed legislation, to the extent that I understand it, gives that a chance to happen. We'll see if it gets even more serious from here, but it's already gotten more serious than a lot of people said it ever had a chance to. That's worth noting. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, tomorrow, we've already said, big day for UGA recruiting, but next week, one of the biggest weeks of the off season. And in so many ways, the unofficial kickoff to the upcoming season, it's SEC Media Days taking place in Atlanta. This is, to be honest, a little bit more of a media thing than a fan thing. I don't dispute that, but here's what matters to you if you're not exactly a media person. There will be a lot of content to consume next week, and around DawgNation, we're going to do everything we can to bring you the best coverage of that. So as we get ready to close things out today with our Long Drink, Long Finish, presented by the Finnish Long Drink, let's also give you a little bit of a taste of what Media Day is going to look like. In fact, let me give you the schedule here, starting with Monday. We'll look at when Georgia's going to be there. Let me give you all of this here right now. So on Monday, you've got 4 teams present. It'll be LSU. It'll be Ole Miss. It'll be South Carolina. It'll be Vanderbilt. Now, keep in mind, Diego Pavia going to be the Vandy quarterback. He'll be there next week. Pavia recently had some huge things to say about Alabama and stuff like that. So we'll see if he brings some of that to the table. Also, Lane Kiffin, Brian Kelly, Shane Beamer. These are all 3 coaches that have some playoff aspirations. We'll see what they have to say starting on Monday. Greg Sankey will also be a big part of the events on Monday. He'll kind of give his, for lack of a better way of saying it, sort of state of the league address to begin SEC Media Days. Then it's Georgia Day on Tuesday. They'll be there with Auburn and Tennessee and Texas. Texas is bringing Arch Manning. That's going to be a huge deal. But what Kirby Smart and the Georgia players, among them Gunnar Stockton, have to say, that'll be the massive part of Tuesday. And then when you get to Wednesday, it's Alabama, it's Florida, it's Mississippi State, it's Oklahoma. And then the final day on Thursday, not exactly the main event here, Arkansas, Kentucky, Missouri, and Texas A&M. So if you've ever been to like a trade show or something like that in your profession, you get to the end of the week, you get people kind of checking out and flying out and going home. That's the sort of Thursday version of SEC Media Days with Arkansas, Kentucky, Missouri, and Texas A&M. But nonetheless, we'll see what kind of fireworks are in store for next week. Big coverage, including DawgNation Daily, all 4 days next week, doing the show from Atlanta, bringing you a lot of that. And we're already in Atlanta, but just down the road here in Atlanta. So that is coming up next week. Really looking forward to that. We'll make that your long drink, long finish, presented by the Finnish Long Drink here. And if you want to enjoy your weekend leading into some of our recruiting coverage tomorrow or SEC Media Days coming next week, well, a great way to do that is with the delicious flavor of the Finnish Long Drink. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail, and I like simple things in my life. I like mixed drinks. I don't have to mix myself. That's what the Finnish Long Drink is, whether it's the traditional blue can, that's the traditional citrus, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. You like the peach-flavored version, you're in the peach state. You like the Long Drink pineapple. That's a really popular flavor. Long Drink Zero, that's no carbs, no sugar. Whatever you like, the Finnish Long Drink has it for you. So if you go to thelongdrink.com, you can find out where you can pick some up today. Golf courses all across the state, beverage stores, restaurants, so many great ways to enjoy the Finnish Long Drink. And when you go online and look at the website, you can find the story of exactly kind of how it started in Helsinki, how it got here to the United States. Been a big part of DawgNation now for a great number of years. So online, thelongdrink.com for more of that. That is thelongdrink.com for more on that. Let me also give you one more shout out here before we say goodbye here today. Our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, we love Georgia Farm Bureau for the great support they provide to hardworking folks right here in Georgia. Our agricultural community, for instance, Georgia Farm Bureau has been a great supporter of them forever when it comes to insurance needs, but they can provide that same level of support to you now, too. Auto insurance, home insurance, these are things you have to have, life insurance, other things that kind of exist in that sort of financial services space. You want to take good care of yourself, you want to take good care of those you love, Georgia Farm Bureau provides you a chance to do that. They are always the home team. Give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. Or find them online, gfbinsurance.com. The GFB stands for Georgia Farm Bureau, gfbinsurance.com, for a lot more on that today. And as we wrap up, we'll give you a golden shoe. I tell you, I always love those of you that kind of are out there sort of showing some support and reminding folks about DawgNation Daily. One of our great friends, our buddy Bubby Dean, who many of you know on social media, he did that this week. So first of all, Dog Fan Forever, Greg, wrote on X that he had a 9-hour flight to Rome taking place. And I'm assuming that's the Rome that's in Italy, not the Rome that Kaylee Mansell comes from. But the 9-hour flight to Rome, he says, I'm going to drink some Woodford Reserve, and I'm going to scout out Georgia's competition instead of sleeping, meaning he's going to read one of these college football preview magazines, and he shows a picture of that. Our buddy Bubby Dean also writes in to say, make sure you download some DawgNation Daily podcast before you go. I appreciate Bubby with that suggestion. I hope Greg has a great time in Rome. We had the photo the other day of the folks in like Venice. Y'all are some amazing world travelers. I'm just sitting here in the studio, and I'm glad to know y'all are seeing the world. And as Bubby said, glad to have you taking some DawgNation Daily episodes with you as you go. So a golden shoe going Bubby's direction for all of that. Lousy, stinking Gators, the only thing they're cruising for is a bruising coming up 1,707 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great weekend. We'll see you tomorrow. Live coverage of 2 big commitment announcements. Hoping for good news for Georgia. Back here Monday for SEC Media Days live on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. If y'all don't mind, leave that graphic up for 1 second because I got to bend down and grab my charger to sort of charge my laptop here before it goes dark. Our desk is a lot taller than it used to be, so there is no graceful way for me to do that. But I am now plugged in. I'm now ready to read your comments. We are ready to go here today. So let me go to YouTube, and then we'll see what's going on. Let's get ready to do that. Good to see Christy in the comment section today. If I hadn't seen Christy in a little while, glad to see her here. I miss y'all when you're gone. Glad to see Christy here. Let us see what else. Chef Jay Bowen says he enjoys the media days content. I do as well. You know, I've sort of felt like it would be better if instead of SEC media days, it was SEC fan days that the media covered. To me, that might be a little bit more interesting. But nonetheless, it should be good. Like media days becomes a little bit of an I think the word is insular. Is that how you say it? Insular? Am I using that word right? Yeah. It becomes a little bit of an insular event, I think. But fun nonetheless, I guess. AP says, I think it's INSULAR. I think I know how to spell it. I'm not sure I know how to say it. I think it's insular. Is it insular or insular? Okay, yeah, that's another one of those words I probably shouldn't be using. AP says when players are getting paid, that makes it professional, so it's already professional. Yeah, I would say there's a difference between compensation and employees. That you can get compensation without being an employee. In fact, there are a ton of people in the sports media world that would not want to be an employee, and if you forced them to, they'd be very unhappy. They operate as what we call a contractor, and that's what some people want. And not everybody wants that. Some people want the benefits that come from employment of you typically get company-sponsored healthcare, things like that. But the downside of that is you're also kind of beholden to your employer in a way that a contractor often isn't. But even as like a contractor in sports media, while you perhaps have the freedom to kind of move around, do what you want to do, if you're happy with who you are contracted to, you typically sort of have an unofficial, unwritten agreement with them, which is, for instance, not to get too deep in the weeds, but when I first started doing DawgNation Daily years ago, without getting too much in my own stuff, I was a contractor, and I was happy being a contractor. I didn't necessarily seek employment status. So technically speaking, as the host of DawgNation Daily, if you want to go back to like say 2015, I could have gone and done a different show. Legally speaking, there was nothing to prevent me from doing that. But if I had, DawgNation would have been very upset, and therefore they probably wouldn't have wanted me to do the show. So in other words, I didn't have a contract. I wasn't an employee. I was sort of free to do what I wanted, but I was happy enough in my situation that I wouldn't have done anything like that. I didn't need a contract to remain loyal to DawgNation because I was happy in my contractor role, at least, at the stage of life I was in at the time. The point is, the same thing is kind of true for a lot of college athletes, which is you can make them happy and you can do right by them without making them employees. Because, once again, without getting too deep in the weeds, a lot of places that have sort of thought, hey, we'll be fair to people by mandating employment. States have done this, essentially ending, 1099 style work. And there were pretty big revolts within those states about that sort of thing. But we're not going to go any deeper on that topic because and also AP also says it's not already a professional sport. Look, this to me is a really important thing about college football, or just college athletics in general, but let's mostly about college football. I think everybody makes a mistake when they try to make college football like something else, no matter what they try to make it like. College football, sort of within the realm of American culture, sits at a lunch table completely by itself. There is nothing like college athletics, primarily college football. There is nothing like college football. And anybody, anytime that tries to make college football like something else, they're making a huge mistake. Let me give you an example on two extremes. Extreme number one is these players have value. They deserve to be compensated. Therefore, college football is no different than anything else. It's just like the NFL or the NBA or anything like that. But somehow, some way in American society, that's not quite true. Because if it was true, if college football was a quote-unquote professional sport just like any other professional sport, college football would have had some competition from someone else who wanted to make it into a better version of the profession. In other words, we were told for a long time that this was some unfair monopoly because supposedly the players weren't getting paid. But if that was the case, and this is not a rhetorical question, this is something you should think about and consider. If that was the case, then how come somebody didn't just swoop in and start their own version of the professional sport for young professional athletes that play on Saturdays instead of Sundays? How come somebody didn't just swoop in and make it a better version of professional football? The answer is because they wouldn't have been successful. How many spring football leagues, another kind of professional football, have we seen try to materialize over the course of my lifetime, right? The last 4 decades, let's say. Many. And they've all, for the most part, failed. Now, some of them still exist, but none of them have found any success whatsoever, and most of them have completely disappeared. So something about college football's perpetual ability to thrive is about something other than the professional aspect of the very talented, valuable athletes that are on the field. There is an image that we have in our mind that these are still young people being developed in life as college students. And even if that's kind of a charade, there is still value in that charade. There just is. I'm a theme park fan. And when Disney started, are you familiar with Hollywood Studios? When it first came on, it was called MGM Studios, but it's essentially now what is Disney Hollywood Studios. When it first started, and I believe it was Michael Eisner who said this. It was I think Eisner was the CEO at the time. Somebody said this. Maybe it wasn't Eisner. Maybe it wasn't CEO yet. But somebody said that Hollywood Studios was Hollywood as it never was and as it always would be. In other words, a celebration of a golden age of Hollywood that may or may not have really existed the way we kind of think of it in our mind. College football sort of functions the same way. College football is as it ever was, as it never was, and as it always will be. In other words, it's never quite been college kids going to class and playing games and, just being regular kids. It's never quite been that. But the fake charade, the image, the veneer of that is what makes it popular. And if in a cynical way you sort of scrape all that off because it's not real to begin with, then all of a sudden you've got something that's not actually quite as attractive to the American public. And there's 1,000 examples that proves that. But on the flip side of all that, and we'll get back to your comments, there is also the other extreme of those who've wanted to make this like any other kind of extracurricular activity for regular college students, no different than anybody else. It's obviously not that either. In other words, this isn't the same thing as the chess club, and it isn't the same thing as the NFL. It is something completely different. And there is nothing in the world like this. There isn't. Other countries, Europe, for instance, where they love sports, they don't have sports connected to schools the way we do here. They don't have college football in Europe. This is a uniquely American thing, and even within America, there's nothing quite like this. All right, more comments. Let's see what else. By the way, Tennille and Foster talking about missing SEC country. I miss that too. I do. I miss it. I miss it every day. Spencer Clark says he's looking forward to playing Marshall because we get to see our depth. Here's what I'll tell you about those 2 games that Georgia plays to begin this season. Normally, in a normal situation, you could just totally fast forward past a Marshall, or is it Austin Peay? Who is it that Georgia? Is it Austin Peay? You could just fast forward to these games. I think this year these games are incredibly fascinating. Because even in 2023, when Georgia was really good offensively against the likes of Ball State and those other teams they were playing to begin that year, Georgia kind of got off to a slow start offensively in those games too, a little bit like was a big issue last season. So when Georgia plays Marshall, when Georgia plays, I think it's Austin Peay, when you play those games, you're going to want to see Georgia get off to a good start offensively. You're going to want to see Georgia, even against a weaker opponent, flex itself offensively just a bit. You're going to want to see that. And it's not necessarily all that predictive what the rest of the season is going to look like, but it is a good chance for Georgia to sort of, showcase itself offensively. By the way, our buddy Bo Molinari's in here, and Bo's a big A&M fan, a former part of our chat for SEC Country. He says, bring back SEC Country, BA. Hey, maybe one of these days we'll do that. Wyatt Fielden says, what are your thoughts? Should the Braves be buyers or sellers at the trade deadline? There's no reason they shouldn't be sellers. There's just not. The Braves, they ain't it this year. It's just not coming together. Not coming together. Now, I wouldn't trade Ronald Acuna, but I'd probably trade Chris Sale. I probably would, or at least look to see what I could get for him. I probably would do that. I just think this is a little bit of an organizational kind of tipping point for the Braves. Of the vibe is just different now, and it just is. It just is. And I would say that on paper they still seem better than their record reflects, but at a certain point in time, that's just not worth anything anymore. So if you have a chance to get yourself better, kind of replenish your minor league, stock a bit, I think you should probably do that. Let's get some DawgNation.com comments. DT says back during his career enjoyed being a contractor. Yeah, a lot of people do. I mean, I'm telling you right now, when you think about like a lot of like when you're watching TV, when you're watching a game on Saturday, and like you see Chris Fowler, Kirk Herbstreit in the broadcast booth, but obviously a lot of people make that broadcast take place. Like there are a lot of people that make that broadcast happen. I'm talking about the people on the broadcast crew, camera operators, audio people, things like that. Y'all, they would revolt if you try to make them employees. I mean, some of those guys are, working as contractors. They kind of set up their own LLC. This is not tax advice. I'm not an accountant. They're making really good money. If you can get in that sort of broadcast crew world, that can be a very lucrative career. And that's hard work, and it's not easy to get on that. And we're seeing a lot of broadcasts kind of pared down from what they once were, but that can be a really good living. Bill Camacho referencing the Oklahoma 47-game win streak. We talked about this while I was on vacation. One of the greatest disappointments for me is I just don't think people realize how close Georgia could have come to winning 47 games in a row. It is a record that I'm very well aware of. For some reason, it happened way before I was born, like decades before I was born. But I've always just been sort of aware of that record. Georgia came a lot closer to doing that than people realize. Garrison Tucker says, who would be your 4 picks for College Game Day hosts? Great question. I'd put Pollock back on there. I would. I'd probably put Greg McElroy on there. I like Reese Davis as the host. And so for my 4th, I'd probably put somebody on there to kind of stir the pot. And if I've got 2 SEC guys, if you want like a hot take artist, something like that, I'd put Danny Cannell on there. What if College Game Day was Davis hosting, McElroy, Pollock, and then in the sort of like heel role, what if you had Danny Cannell bringing the anti-SEC shtick with Pollock and McElroy kind of talking him down? Because like the cable news, you watch cable news, you've always got the one person on the other side that's sort of stirring the pot a little bit. He could kind of be that for game day. I wouldn't hate that. That's also the sort of pro wrestling promoter in me that's always looking to sort of cast the heel. By the way, Saturday night's main event in Atlanta this weekend. So much going on in Atlanta. So much going on. You got Beyonce 4 nights at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Let me say one thing quickly about that. And I don't really quite know what to do about this, but just something I've noticed. So one of the things you hear a lot is that we don't have what you call them. You've heard this word before, monoculture. We don't have a monoculture anymore. In other words, we don't have a lot of shared experiences. People have sort of algorithmic-based taste, very, very niche. What I watch, like, listen to, very, very different than what you watch, like, listen to. Sports is kind of the only monoculture we have, sort of shared cultural experiences now. And yet, as true as that seems to be, have you noticed this? And I don't know what to do about this. I feel like there are more stadium acts in music than there have ever been. We were talking about this the other day related to like Sanford Stadium hosting concerts where like there are just a lot more stadium acts than there used to be. Now, Beyonce is obviously a stadium act, has been for a long time. Like anytime you kind of, I think you've got multiple generations of music fans that kind of like her. So, clearly stadium act, but 4 nights in a stadium is a big deal. That's a huge, huge tour. And in all genres of music, I feel like you've just got more stadium acts than used to. That's a lot of tickets. A small stadium show would be 40, 50,000. Some of them are set up to even, house more people than that. So in a time in which our tastes are supposed to be more fragmented, I just think it's interesting that we have so many stadium acts in music now. And you could say, well, young people are just buying more concert tickets than young people used to. Well, maybe that's the case, but that also kind of runs counter into everything else we always hear. Allegedly, they don't go to movies. Gen Z drinks less alcohol than previous generations do, studies show. So apparently they're just saving all that money and spending on concert tickets, I guess. Because I just don't remember when I was growing up there being as many not an arena, not State Farm Arena, 20,000. This is Mercedes-Benz Stadium, 40, 50, if not 60, 70,000. I feel like there are way more stadium acts than there were 20 years ago. And that seems to be running counter to what we're told is actually happening in pop culture at large. Just something I've noticed. Brandon Griffin says, I prefer the tougher schedule. Iron sharpens iron. Last year, Texas was not ready for the smoke at the end of the year. Yeah, I don't know that I fully buy that. I mean, Brandon, let me say it this way. It's entertaining for us. I mean, we're setting up this year for a season to be as entertaining as any we've seen. But here's the thing we got to be really careful about. Completely separate from Georgia. How much of what we think about so-and-so team is almost solely related to the schedule that they play? Because, look, if Georgia finds that third loss, which could happen, ain't nobody, bad grammar, intentional, ain't nobody going to say, but yeah, they played such a tough schedule. We already see examples of how teams were treated a year ago, that there is just no ability to quantify the difficulty of a schedule that a team plays. And with schedules being so different, Brandon, I do worry about the fact that we're going to think that various teams had a good season, and maybe the only real catalyst for that was just who they played. For instance, think about like SMU, Indiana. SMU for the most part avoided the Clemsons, the Miamis, the better ACC teams. SMU avoided those teams. They're undefeated. They're playing the college, or 11-1, whatever it was they were. They're playing the college football playoff. And I'm not saying they were a bad team. They weren't a bad team, obviously. Even to beat mediocre teams, if you beat almost all of them, that's a pretty good accomplishment. But the number one factor that made SMU a playoff team a year ago was the schedule that it played. Same thing for Indiana, was the schedule that it played. Conversely, if you're a different team playing a more difficult schedule, for instance, you make a case that, some of these teams that get beat by Georgia, Clemson, Oregon, things like that to begin the season, like how much better off would they have been? They just hadn't played that game. Perhaps they would. So I do think it's fun for us to see more big games. Georgia has a lot more of those than it's ever had in the past. But I don't believe it's advantageous to have the toughest schedule. I don't believe that. Oh, by the way, Randy Hall mentioning the Gainesville quarterback Kareem Hughley, class of 2027, does commit to Clemson. That's a pretty big get for Clemson. They've obviously had success at Gainesville before, but that's a pretty big get. All right. SEM Dog, today's my 68th birthday, he says. I'd love 2 belated presents in the form of 2 commitments tomorrow for the dogs. Y'all bring them home on Dog Nation. I do love that. That's great. That's great. Happy birthday, SEM Dog. Appreciate you being a part of our show. Appreciate that for sure. Oh, let me go to Facebook for a moment. By the way, our good friend Kaylee Mansell getting ready to enjoy herself some Finnish long drink here this weekend. I love that. All right, let me get some Facebook comments. On Facebook, and then we'll let you get your weekend started. But we want you to be here tomorrow, too. On Facebook here for a moment. Ken Holcomb says, I was really looking forward to the Braves being competitive when the All-Star game was played. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, you know, Atlanta's kind of waited a long time, I would say too long, for this All-Star game. And it's just sort of a shame that it comes at a time in which the Braves just won't really be celebrated during the event like they, perhaps thought they were going to. That is a shame. Brian Whitaker says he's going to Raw on Monday night in Birmingham. That's really fun. So you've got the 2-night event in Atlanta this weekend, leading into Raw on Monday, and leading into what is probably the second biggest WWE event of the year. Would y'all say that? SummerSlam, first time this year is a 2-night event. Like, as someone who likes wrestling, but I can't kind of build my whole life around wrestling the way that I used to, I'm amazed by how much wrestling there is. Like, if you watched all of the wrestling that there is, you wouldn't be able to sleep. Like, there are 3 WWE events in Atlanta this weekend. You got the women's event on Sunday, main event on Saturday, and there's the NXT event at the center stage, which I've seen wrestling the center stage before. That's fun. I didn't see the old, Saturday night tapings, but I saw ECW there 20 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it was. Great venue for wrestling. Great venue for wrestling. So you got 3 WWE events in Atlanta this weekend. And then SummerSlam's a 2-night event here too. Like, I can't imagine watching every minute of televised wrestling that exists. And there's, by the way, a whole nother promotion in addition to the WWE. There's at least one more national promotion. But yeah, Raw in Birmingham would be great. That'd be really fun. Really fun. Good for you, Brian. Hey, do me a favor. Come back and tell us how that went. I'd love to do that. That's great. Oh yeah, by the way, Bill Sanders had a good idea. Marcus Spears was great on college football. It was great on college football. It's one of the things I think that ESPN's not done a great job with is it has kind of used college football media stuff to build guys into like an NFL, an analyst role, as if somehow, that's what everybody should aspire to. But being a college analyst can be a great life. And, Spears with his LSU ties, he was great at that. That'd be a great guy to have on game day. Bill, that's a really good idea. It's a really good idea. Colin Susan Richter saying, BA, high school football is close to starting. My Colquitt County Packers scrimmage Bainbridge, August 7th. Yeah, we're right here at that. We're inside of a month from all that, which is awesome. And then opening up with a home game against Benedictine on August 15th. That's awesome, man. I'm so excited about that. And obviously looking forward to seeing what those South Georgia teams are going to be able to do this year. I think Rob Phillips is also getting after me for saying Cannell should be the 4th guy on game day. I knew they wouldn't like that. Philip Jordan Wells says Cowboy Carter is better than wrestling in Atlanta this weekend. So Bill also said he worked some of those studio shows for Wrestling the Center Stage. Yeah. So, I drive by every day the building where the old 6:05 Saturday night, World Championship Wrestling used to be taped when I was a kid, and then Center Stage is sort of right beside that too. I never got to go to that, but I would love to, because that was the formative years of my life for sure. For sure. Let me see what else. Rob Phillips also mentioning McAfee. Yeah, McAfee's not a guy that I want on game day. I'm not anti-McAfee necessarily. For instance, I think he's great on wrestling. But as much as I like pro wrestling, I don't want game day to be pro wrestling. Like, there is a thing about game broadcasts. This is a weird thing to describe, but I do want game broadcasts to feel a little fancy. I want them to feel a little bit prestigious. I like the big orchestral, cinematic, epic, sweeping musical opens, the Monday Night Football, dun, 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 dun. I love the NBC Sunday Night Football now, the dun, 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 da, 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 da. I want my football game on TV to feel like a lot of pomp and circumstance. I want that. Now, I'm not against like Hank Williams Jr. singing, Rowdy Friends, or Carrie Underwood singing, Waiting All, Day for Sunday Night. I'm not against that part of it either, but I want that to lead into the pomp and circumstance. I loved, Coming to Your City from Big and Rich. So, but I wanted to lead, so you can be kind of fun and freewheeling to start, but I want it to lead into something that's really, really over the top with the big orchestral sweeping epic score. I don't want what I'm watching to feel small. And that's one of the things, I've kind of railed on ESPN's NBA coverage before. It just feels really, really small. It's very cable-y. And I think by putting McAfee on game day, as big a star as he is, I just think that McAfee has made game day feel more cable-y. I think he's made it feel very much akin to the same stuff that ESPN's kind of running during daytime TV blocks. And that's not what I want the game broadcast, and game day is essentially a lead into the game broadcast. That's not what I want that to be. There is a prestige for the big broadcasts that I think ESPN's always struggled to conjure. In fact, they essentially had to outsource all of Monday Night Football to get it to feel that way. Like, they pay Joe Buck, Troy Aikman $2 gazillion to do the Monday Night Football games because they tried forever to create their own version of NFL mystique, NFL prestige. They just couldn't do it. They tried every combination they could think of. They just couldn't do it. They finally just had to go out and, bring the Fox guys over. And essentially, you got Buck and Aikman doing the same broadcast they were doing at Fox. And it just feels bigger than what ESPN could do on its own. And on the NBA stuff, they've just never been able to do that. It's just never felt big. NBA on TNT always felt so much bigger. So much so, what's ESPN doing? They're bringing over inside the NBA, and they're just going to basically run that on their own airwaves. They have figured out the college football stuff a little bit better. ESPN Game Day has always been an all-time great show. But left to their own devices, ESPN would ruin that too. All right, before we go. Berna Blackburn also likes All My Rowdy Friends. Yeah, I like that. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says she also wants a gazillion dollars. Me too. Brian Whitaker says, I always kick off the college football season with a big crock pot full of Rotel dip and little barbecue smokies and burger sliders. Can't wait for some football. Yeah, I'm excited about that too. Excited about that for sure. Oh, yeah, Randy Hall pointing out, we don't have Eddie or the helmet on the desk today. That's my fault. I forgot to. Garrison Tucker says ESPN also cannot broadcast Major League Baseball. Yeah, they're so bad with that. I mean, and this is what worries me sometimes about, college football, the SEC included, does whatever ESPN wants. And on the one hand, sort of makes some sense. ESPN does pay for everything. But the thing that college football should be aware of, and the SEC in particular should be aware of, if you take all your marching orders from ESPN simply because they're founding your feast, just keep this in mind, that ESPN is essentially a very large failed business. In other words, it generates a ton of revenue but zero profit. And so while ESPN is gigantic, I'm not really quite so sure how smart it is, because it is totally conceivable in the next 10 years that ESPN as we've known it could basically not exist. I mean, the future of ESPN in a non-linear TV world is still very much up for grabs. Very much up for grabs. So like the one question I would ask the key leaders in college football is, are we sure that ESPN should be the one giving the orders for the direction of college football's future, given the fact that we don't know that ESPN has all that certain of a future? Are we sure about that? It's at least worth considering. All right, we're going to go back on YouTube one more time. Bo Molinari mentioning it was tough watching Lee Corso these past 5 years or so. I always thought that while obviously Corso was in kind of a declined condition from where he was, prior to having a stroke, I really thought that ESPN did a really good job of handling that with a lot of dignity. I really did. I didn't have a problem with him being on TV. I said before, I don't think that getting older should be treated as a scandal. Corso was a beloved figure, super entertaining, and he was not what he once was in terms of his health. I don't think we have to be scared of that necessarily. Still had a very close relationship with Kirk Herbstreit. Herbstreit was always really kind to him. I thought it was I think their relationship on TV has been really genuine and warm. I think it's really nice. And, Corso comes on, offers a few very closely planned, prepared type remarks during a segment. But as someone who's kind of given his life to game day, or at least a large portion of the later stages of his life to game day, finding a way to allow that to continue for as long as it did in a respectful way, I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing. I mean, clearly he is not the man he was in the 1990s, of course, but I don't think we should feel scandalized by someone just getting older. But I do obviously acknowledge that he's not what he once was. Let's see what else. All right, we got to get ready to go. John Adams says, do you ever see a destination SEC tailgate preseason event like in Nashville or something like that with concert and stuff like that? I'd love to see that. I kind of wonder, like the sense that I had pre-COVID was that the SEC might be building to make media days more into a fan event. That's just the sense that I got. I don't know if it's true, but it's the sense that I got. That was the sense that I got. But obviously, when you had the weirdness of 2020, a lot of stuff that was perhaps trending true before that has not been true since then. But I would be in favor of that. I like the idea of, if you're going to have an SEC media day, you got to have a SEC fan days. And frankly, there's not quite enough fan days in the lead up to college football. I'd like to see a little bit more of that. I think that's a really good question. All right, we're going to go for now. See you tomorrow. Live coverage of two big commitment announcements here on the DawgNation video channels Monday from SEC Media Days. But for now, big thanks to our friends at RS Andrews for making it all possible. I had a chance to kind of chat with Dari Payro a little bit yesterday. We had a nice exchange, and who knows, there may be a little golf in our future, which I'm looking forward to. So you can find RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. The RS stands for Rapid Service. That means if your air conditioning goes out, if you have a plumbing emergency, something like that, RS Andrews can show up quick and get you taken care of on all of that. So find them online, rsandrews.com. That is rsandrews.com. Also, have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday for SEC Media Days on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.